fundamental thing that I want to point out is that I can't tell you what to do here. Basically, this is a balance, and that balance is the balance between missing information because you've purged it and having huge files so everything takes longer because you wanted to keep these things. Now, in a few minutes, I'll introduce one option that kind of helps with this, but from the point of view of thinking about purging, it's the balance. And to get rather specific here for just a second, what I would like you to do is, for those of you who do accounts payable or for those of you who do accounts receivable, what I'd like you to think about is, when was the last time you had to look up a vendor or a vendor history or a voucher from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago? If you go through that, and each one of you is different, each one of you has a different business with different requirements, some of you will have said, oh, I really need that stuff to 5 years out. Some of you will have said, oh, well, probably I don't look them up past a year, but let's keep 2 years just in case. That's just a sample of the kind of balance, because you've gone through a process saying, well, I have vendors who call me going back way back, so I do need that data. Other people will say, I never hear from them after 2 years or after a year and a half, so 2 years is fine. Anything in between, anything in that range is fine with me, as long as you've taken it consciously. You've said, I don't need this stuff. And what you might want to do is, I have a rule of thumb, which is called the doubling rule, which is simply that when I think about how often I have to access something, let's say I would say I rarely have to access something more than 1 year old. Well, I double that and I keep it for 2 years. Or if I say rarely 3 years, I double it and it's 5 or 6 years. That sort of logic may apply and it may be useful to you. I'm going to be, in just a minute, going through a table, but as part, and so I want to just mention that I will be coming up with specific recommendations for the files, but those recommendations are based on the kind of averages like what I've just been talking about, so that although they are down in print, I just have to emphasize these are not to be treated as if they were written and given to you from Moses to the people after coming off the mount. This is a case of you having to make decisions, sitting down and possibly talking with managers, talking with other people, and determining what kind of scenarios will require for you to be able to get rid of data. It is getting rid of data, but it has very significant positive value, which really is part 3 here, and that is every business needs to determine its own schedule. Now, there are some alternatives. We've actually discussed these alternatives in other webinars, and those are setting up archive companies. What you can do is, if you're running with Company 00 or Company AA, before you do purging, you can set up an archive company, and let's assume, and this is true for most people, that they do most of their purging as part of the year-end process. Although there is some purging that can be done on a monthly basis, and that's fine, the major purging, the major review of the size of the vendor history file and the accounts and that sort of stuff usually happens as part of the whole process of year-end review. And so purging is typically part of that, and I would recommend that it be just built into that process. Given that that is the case, it actually does make sense that before you get hot and heavy into your year-end, and therefore the purging, you make an archive company of all the data that corresponds to that year. Why? For a couple of reasons. One of them is that if you have a copy of the data that represents everything up to December the 31st or January the 10th, it doesn't matter. When you come to purge, you can say to yourself, I have all of that data in the archive company. I can be more aggressive about purging. So maybe that 2-year limit that you were thinking of could be brought up to be a 1-year limit, because for the occasional time that you have to go back to 2 or 3 years, that's in the archive company. So we have a way of making additional companies so that you could have an AA company, an A2 company for 2012, an A3 for 2013 when it comes time to close it, etc. And you can keep multiple years, and that means each year you can be more aggressive about your purging. The other thing is you can simply copy PBS. So what that means is that, and I don't recommend this because this is the cruder of the two ways of doing it, but if you want to come to a point and do purging, but you're concerned about this, what we can do is, let me just get to a point. Here we have a PBS system. I can simply copy that PBS system, and it's going to copy all of the data and create it as a backup company, a backup copy of PBS. Now, the reason this is crude, it's copying all the programs. If you have any additional prints, it's copying the prints. You can see it can take a while to copy this stuff. But the fact of the matter is, typically it takes 5 or 10 minutes. You've got a full copy of the data just before you've done your purging, which means if it all blows up in your face, you're no farther back than you should be because you can simply restore the backup. But if the purging does work the way you want, and of course usually it does, then you can simply rename this as copy of PBS prior to 2012 purge or prior to 2013 purge. Now, this is the secondary one, as I mentioned. This is the crude version because you're copying all of PBS. What I do recommend, though, is you go out to our archives where we have the webinar and we talk about how to set up a backup company and how to copy the files, because that is much more finessing the system by setting another company. It also has the advantage that if you have an AA company and an A1 company and an A2 company, you can get at the data simply by going to switch companies, which is one of those almost never used functions many people are not aware of. In the control file, we have a switch companies, and we can go out and we can simply pick the company that we want to go to. So you could go from AA, which is your operating company, to A1 or A2 or A3 simply by going to the screen, switching to it, doing what you need to do, running a report, doing a view, taking a query, whatever, and then simply doing a switch back to your AA company, and you're back to where you want to be. So those are the alternatives which kind of sort of allow you to have your cake and eat it because you're making a backup of the data before you're doing the purging. So even if you're a little bit too aggressive with your purging or you're accidentally throwing away data that you really didn't want to throw away, then it is there. And that's equivalent to taking the file folders out of the current accounts payable file, taking them down and putting them in the file room for a year or so until you're happy that you're done.